Welcome to episode 3 of Divine Superconductor Radio. This is your host, Matt Blackburn, and today I'm interviewing Atom Bergstrom. This is a jam-packed 2-hour episode. We cover a lot of topics: the pH myth, highly unsaturated fatty acids, polyunsaturated fatty acids, the effect that those have on the body, Lipofuscin and yellow fat disease. We talk about Fruitarianism, coffee enemas, supplements, all sorts of different topics. He is a wealth of knowledge. I think you're going to really get a lot out of it. So without further ado, here is Mr. Atom Bergstrom. All right, so we're here with Atom Bergstrom. Super excited for this interview. I've actually interviewed him before, years ago, with my friends David and Will. And he's just a wealth of knowledge. I consider him one of my top mentors. He's very humble, very knowledgeable, and has a lot of experience. And he's been interviewed on One Radio Network, Extreme Health Radio, many shows. And I just love how versatile he is. And you could ask him any question and he'll go off with a really mind-blowing answer. So really excited to have you here, Adam. Thank you.
Good to be here. And he mounted his horse and rode off in all directions has been my theme. For better or for worse.
Yeah, I think I heard in an interview you worked like 70 jobs. I'm not up to that level, but I've worked a lot of jobs as well. And you gain so much, just, I guess, street smarts, right? Doing that.
More than 90 jobs.
Wow.
I just couldn't find anything I liked. So eventually I actually started collecting jobs, like people collect stamps. And I didn't tell the people I was being hired by, of course. And so I got a wide range of experience that way. It was fun. And as soon as I get bored, the longest I think I kept a job was in the health food industry, managing a health food store for 6 or 7 years. I left twice, but I kept coming back because it was a fun job. And I got to work all by myself, which is really cool. The owner of the store was down in LA, and I was up here in Carpinteria, California. So I saw him once a month, and I basically had the store for myself. So that was groovy.
That's awesome. Yeah, I've had friends that work in the supplement section at the natural grocery store, and we just talk for hours. We used to do that all the time. And you can just spend so much time looking at all the different supplements, right? It's almost like another language.
It was a good job. In fact, later I worked up in Oregon, and the really advantage of that, I got to interview all of I bought the material. So I got to ask them, where does that come from? Because, of course, I've been into time. You get a certain thing from a certain time and blah, blah for food. But it's harder to find out where the supplements come from. Do they come from a tree, a bush, a vine, a root, what? And so I wouldn't buy their product unless they told me. So I had a research team basically doing that. And I did it at Scandia here locally. But up in Oregon, it was a bigger operation, multiple stores. And so I got to just sit down a lot and find out where these things were coming from. Learned a lot about the companies there.
Yeah, the sourcing's everything, right? But sometimes even the substance itself is toxic, as we'll kind of talk about. So, so how many years have you been studying natural health? Like, sounds like most of your life. Or?
Actually, my first experience with vegetarianism was in 1955, believe it or not. I read Yogananda. I really felt sorry for the animals. And it was a disaster. After a couple of months, I got sick. But finally, I did it for 14 years at one time. And now, for all intents and purposes, I'm a vegetarian. I have a burger once in a while, but I think the last time was close to a year now. And so we eat really low on the food chain, except for eggs. That's about the closest we get to meat. Oh, I ate some organic beef when we got evacuated here. You probably heard of the disaster here in Montecito. So Vibrant Gal got really, really sick. And I didn't, because I took Ray Pete's advice and beat the flu with sugar. I took a bunch of white sugar, believe it or not, in coffee. And at one time when I tried to wean myself off it, well, I started to get the flu seriously. So I ran back in the kitchen, took coffee and sugar, and I never did get the flu. Well, other people on the ranch we had evacuated to were going to the hospital. They were actually driving him out to the hospital. And Vibrant Gal had a tonic seizure in my arms. I thought she had died. I'm screaming at her, come back, no, no, no. And I said, God, come back. And she suddenly woke up and said, what are you yelling about? But she was so weak, I had to roll her. Fortunately, at the ranch we stayed, the chair had rollers on it. So I got one of the chairs from the kitchen and rolled her into the bathroom, rolled her back to the bed. And this went on for about 3 or 4 days. It was a very serious flu, and I escaped it entirely. So
that's incredible.
So I don't know if it's going to work again, but I'd rather not get the flu. But usually the flu is no threat. We don't need vaccinations. All you need to do, it's a message, take off, watch TV or YouTube or goof off or read or sleep, and then it goes away. That's been my strategy about the flu before.
Yeah, so that's interesting because I've done it all, like paleo, keto, and I recently had a revelation of thinking of it's healthier to oxidize sugar than fat. And for years, I've been of the mentality that the more energy production we have, the more we can detox and heal. But where that energy is coming from is really important, right? Whether it's sugar or free fatty acids.
Right. I'm on the sugar camp, and Otto Warburg never said that sugar caused cancer. He basically said that the lactic acid from improper sugar metabolism caused cancer. And that does happen. It's really easy to get lactic acid, both from stress. Lactic acid became popular for a while, like it was a good thing. You get it from fermented foods and things. But back in the days when I was in TM, Transcendental Meditation, in 1970, lactic acid was the devil. It caused all kinds of problems. And by meditating, you got rid of lactic acid. So when I got in the health food industry and they started saying lactic acid was good, I became confused. I thought, now, wait a minute. How come we were struggling to get rid of it and it's good? I think fermentation is okay in like sauerkraut and things like that, but coffee is fermented. But it's gone too far, I think, and fermentation is incomplete metabolism.
Yeah, and pyruvic acid or pyruvate kind of balances it out. Is that right?
That's what I understand. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Awesome. So, I mean, we could just dive in because I've just had my mind blown with PUFA and HUFA and vegetable oils. And I'm mostly on a saturated fat diet. I do a lot of milk, a lot of raw cheese, a few eggs every day.
Great. Years ago, I felt guilty because all of the cholesterol thing. I was drinking 2 quarts of milk a day. And every time I took a glass, I felt guilty about it, having no idea that I was actually good for my health. So for years, I did that. And even as a vegetarian, I ate milk and cheese and things like that. People told me to get rid of it. And I also was kind of addicted to it because one time I went off it for 3 days. And finally, I couldn't take it anymore, ran back home, drank a quart of milk, and ate 3 cheese sandwiches. So.
There's an opioid effect, right, to dairy?
I think it really does. So there is a case for it, but I eat dairy products now. But I don't drink milk, but I do raw cheese, and we do a lot of butter. Everything's in butter. We cook our eggs in butter. We use coconut oil and saturated fat, yeah.
Yeah, we're super fortunate to be in California because most of us have access to raw dairy, or in some states it's illegal and they get raided.
Most states, I think, let's see, is it just 4 states? I think it's Oregon, Washington, Arizona, and California. I think that's about it. Yeah.
Wow. It's crazy. Hopefully that changes. So it's my understanding that vegetable oils started with the cottonseed oil industry. Is that right? And the seeds were too toxic to use, and so they gave them to animals, and that was like the birth of vegetable oils.
Yeah,
is that kind of accurate?
Pretty much. Actually, the oil industry, when they really got into PUFAs or saying they were good, was with the cottonseed oil. Then Canada came out with their own version, which I call canola oil, Canada's revenge for us sending them all the cottonseed oil. Yeah, yeah. And even now, when you buy, if you go to a market and get say soy oil or some other oil, which is certainly not good, but they can put 10% cottonseed oil and not tell you. According to FDA rules, 100% means 90%. And they do it, of course. It's cheaper to use the cottonseed oil is really cheap. And
I've heard that with olive oil, right? Like they mix some stuff with olive oil. Olive oil is usually not pure too.
A lot of olive oil, I believe I've heard, is over, accounts vary from 25% to 50% is bogus. We get it from a local salesman here. We've become friends with. They have a ranch up north, and that's where we get all our olives and olive oil.
That's awesome. Yeah, I love your info on olives and how the oleic acid, there was just this, we have to have a shift in the conversation in the health field because everyone thinks it's these PUFAs and these unstable fats that make up the body, but it's really the saturated fats and the oleic acid and the omega-9s, really, that like the meat acid, those are actually beneficial.
I was surprised that the major fatty acid in the human body is oleic acid. We're closer to an olive than we are a cow. Weirdly enough, and stearic acid follows it, and the other ones are, they measure them in the brain because people eat the wrong foods, and so it's like measuring the toxin, and then they rave about it. Hey, it's in the brain, it must be good for you. So just like an olive has some polyunsaturated fatty acids, it varies depending on what kind of soil they're on, and the same with human beings. So yeah, oleic acid, stearic acid, the fatty acids are beneficial for us. And if we eat nothing but sugar and no oils at all, we will make oleic acid from plain old sugar.
Wow. Yeah, that's been blowing my mind. And the info on amino acids too that could be made. And sugar can do a lot. It's amazing how much sugar has been demonized.
It really has. It's a new, first they had cholesterol, now they've got sugar. They always demonize the cheap stuff, you notice, so that you can buy something expensive. And sugar is cheap. Certainly, I've been using a lot of white sugar lately. I don't recommend it because fruit has dietary fiber, which is the breaks. So your blood sugar is really hard to raise when you have the breaks. And most of your morning fruit is fructose, is the major sugar. And our sperms are propelled by fructose, and the liver. Primary sugar is fructose, and then glucose is the brain's food and the heart. So sugars are, simple sugars are basically what we run on.
That's amazing. Yeah, the liver is fascinating. I recently learned, because I'll drink wine occasionally and, clean stuff, and I have friends that drink wine occasionally. And I heard that fructose has like 80% effectiveness at detoxing alcohol. And a lot of people do bitters and milk thistle, but it's really the sugar. I'm not saying drink a margarita, but
yeah, the sugar does a better job than milk thistle, and the other thistle, artichoke, will work. The globe artichoke will work like that too, but the sugar will work better. It goes directly to the liver, and not that artichoke isn't and mistletoe aren't good for you, but the sugar works better, and fresh fruit, in other words.
Yeah, that's fascinating. So just a little background for people. I loved on Facebook, you actually made a breakdown of the most unstable fats to the most stable. I think it was a comment, and you said basically it's HUFA, which is highly unsaturated fatty acids, and then second PUFA, and then MUFA, I think, monounsaturated, and then basically saturated fat and cholesterol is the safest. Is that pretty accurate?
That's pretty accurate. There is a couple of the one of them, I have to think of which it is, of the saturated one that can be harmful, but it's in such small amounts in butter and coconut oil that it doesn't really matter. It's not going to affect your health. And by the way, as bad, quote unquote, as omega-6s are, they're the ones that get the rap. But I find no cases of omega-6 giving yellow fat disease. It's an interesting thing. Soy does. Corn doesn't, and of course all the fish oils, all the algae oils, all the flaxseed oil, the chia oils, they definitely cause yellow fat disease. There's many cases on the internet. I mean, I wrote 8 books on it, and I'm about a third of the way through a 9th one. I actually lost interest in it last year because going through all these scientific articles was just getting boring. But then somehow the conversation came up. Recently, there was an interview with Ray Peat, and so I got back into it. And a recent blog I did was about yellow fat disease again. So I may produce a 9th book before this is over.
That's amazing. Yeah, I think I've read 4 of them, and it's really good. I recommend it for people that are just getting into this, because you cite the studies and a lot of the proof. It's not just making stuff up. It's just you have to dig for the information, right?
You do. And the logic is, volatile oils are what cause problems with the body because they go rancid. Well, obviously, a more volatile oil actually should be worse, and it is. In fact, back in the day, 1982, Dirk Pearson and Sandy Shaw wrote a book called Life Extension. And they were walking big circles around DHA saying, holy cow, if these other oils are that rancid, where they go rancid in the refrigerator in a few days, what do you think DHA and EPA are going to do? And then suddenly the big hype after that book came out for fish oils. I was working in the health food industry, and I read it with interest. But then I read an article that, the reason the Inuit don't get heart attacks is because they don't live even to their 40s often. So they don't have time to get it. So that made me suspicious. I still thought, well, maybe there's some value in cod liver oil. But recently I've even found, I've gone back to the time of the Civil War, and they already were doctors who realized that cod liver oil was causing brown heart disease, they called it, which was a shriveled heart from the cod liver oil's polyunsaturated or highly unsaturated fatty acids causing it. So there's cases that go back all the way to the time of the Civil War when they were using it as a therapy. It did give you a vitamin A. It gave you certain ingredients, so it cured certain things, but at what price? It's like chemotherapy may kill a cancer, but what happens after that?
Yeah. Speaking of price, I heard some controversy about Weston A. Price, the dentist, and I guess he was not a fan of it. I heard yet. The foundation and the community is promoting it.
He recommended the highly processed cod liver oil, and I found his writings directly. He was against fermented. What did he call it? Rotten oil. And recently, there's a dissenter among the Weston A. Price people that said that and got in trouble. And I think they were going to ban him from the convention because he said it's not fermented. You can't ferment an oil. It's rotten. So Sally Fallon didn't care for that.
Wow. Yeah, it would be cool if the conversation could be a little more fluid and open. And that's what I try to share. It's just be, experiment, be a little more open-minded. And so yellow fat disease is the same as lipofuscin, right? Or you call it progressive lipofuscinosis?
Well, if you go to the doctors, they will tell you that lipofuscin causes genetic diseases. And indeed, there's a whole bunch of hereditary related diseases that happen. But it accumulates. And they used to think, even though it would fill up 40% of a cell or more, they found in so-called healthy people, if they thought it was like a cluttered room. In other words, so what if your living room was 40% with boxes and cluttered stuff? You could still operate. But then they found out when you feed or when a lipofuscin gets exposed to iron, copper, zinc, those nice healthy elements, it's like handing it a machine gun and it's shooting at you. So it's very active. It's not passive. It's aggressive, and it starts attacking the rest of the cell. Aubrey de Grey, the anti-aging expert, goes into that. I don't like his idea. His idea is to solve the whole problem genetically. But he knows the danger of lipofuscin, listed in 2 or 3 of his 7 deadly sins of aging. And his one with sugar actually turns out to be polyunsaturated fatty acids and not sugar at all, so-called glycation. Sugar, what do they call it? They even have AGE, aging glycation, whatever.
Yeah, advanced glycation end products. I did like a crazy fasting experiment last year. Where it was like 1 hour eating window. And I was on the premise that sugar causes glycation end products. But now I understand that's actually these unsaturated fats bonding with the protein, right? Causing wrinkling and all that and aging.
That's what I understand it. And also the people who have followed up Otto Warburg, I forget the name of the main expert now. He says that it's not just the sugar that goes bad, it's particularly polyunsaturated fatty acids. And it's in one of his recent books, which I can't quote, but I've got it in one of my books. I have it as a reference.
Wow. Yeah, it's funny. People get aggressive with me that are in the keto community or fasting community. And I was like, proof, where's the proof? And, we all have to do the research ourselves, right? And I like your ebooks because you've compiled a lot of it, but I encourage people to dig. And like you said in an interview with Google, they make it difficult. You have to type in the right thing to find what you want.
They definitely do, because it goes by hits. And obviously you're going to get what they, also they have something, what do they call it? Filter bubbles now, where your own information comes back to you. So if you start a certain way, it's like looking in a mirror. There's even a book written called Filter Bubbles, and it's one of Facebook's strategies. It's one of Google's strategies. So basically, they want to keep you in your own little info bubble. But you can get it. I found when I first got into the internet, and I resisted it. I was one of the later people to come into it. I used a computer, but I refused to get on the internet. When I did, everybody was typing in HTTP and all that. When I realized you could just put a word in and get information, I realized that it was all about psychology and trickery, really, basically. So I started the quotation marks and a whole bunch of other tricks and found things. I had friends that were on computers for 10 years and weren't able to find stuff that I was finding right from the beginning. Then it was like a game to me. Oh boy, how can I even cracked and hacked Google accidentally, not deliberately, but I found a way to get in, and they closed it up soon because obviously other people found out how to get into Google Books when you weren't supposed to be in there, into the books that you can't get into. They let you in to a certain amount, but anyway, it's been fun.
Yeah, that's amazing. I started on I think PubMed and finding all these clinical research papers, but I think you'll be there for years. So now I've realized you have to find people that have compiled research articles that you've never seen before. And usually it's old books, like you mentioned, Life Extension, which I have. That's a great one.
Yep. And the really old books, I find there was more truth between, I'd say, 1890 and 1923. And all of those books are available to the public in entireties. I used to find these books in libraries. I hung out in medical libraries a lot, and they were really hard to find. An osteopathic library in Fort Worth was one of my favorite places. I moved there to be next door to that library, so I could be there from sometimes 7 in the morning till they kicked me out at 2 in the morning. And finally, I didn't even have to sign in. They said, "You spend more time here than our employees. Just come on." I'd research, go in, put my baked potato in the oven, come back in the library, go eat my baked potato, come back again. I virtually lived at that library. But now with the internet, gee, you can stay here in your pajamas or whatever and go any place you want and find so much information. The thing is, like the CIA is the Central Intelligence Agency. There's lots of information, but you have to know how to put it together. It's not the information agency; it's the intelligence agency. So you have to find and get a comprehensive reading on what is going on, and that's more difficult.
That's an interesting point. Yeah. Wow. So I had this question written down. I just thought of, is PUFA to lipofuscin what calcium is to calcification? And I know you have a different view of calcium, and I've recently evolved and understand that it's really if calcium's misplaced due to maybe magnesium deficiency or boron deficiency. But is it kind of like a calcification as people think of that?
Pretty much. Yeah. It's a hardening. In fact, lipofuscin basically is PUFAs accumulated and oxidized. That's what happens. Yeah, you'll always find PUFAs in it, just like in plaque. They make you think it's cholesterol in the plaque, but it's cholesterol coming to the rescue, like the police coming to a mugging. And since the police always show up at a mugging, well, let's blame the police. They obviously are responsible. And this is how medical science often works. And it's there so you can say, look, the police are there every time. It must be the police. Let's get rid of the police. That's what they did with cholesterol. Meanwhile, the mugger is hiding in the plaque because that's what it's mainly made of. The glue that holds the plaque together, the protein, the sugar products, and everything are held together by PUFAs, and it's lipofuscin.
Wow, because I've known a lot of fruitarians over the years that lose their teeth. Is that because they have accumulated PUFA that causes teeth decay? Because I know sugar gets a bad rap for harming the teeth.
I'm one of the victims of that, and one of the things about that is when you take what do you call it, complex carbohydrates, it sticks to your teeth, you notice? But when you eat plain sugar, it goes down your gut. It's not even in your teeth. The bacteria don't get anything. But after chewing crackers or bread, like I used to do, you'll have this film on your teeth. And basically, you have to brush your teeth all the time to keep that off. So the bacteria love complex carbohydrates. So the whole sugar in the gum, the sugar substitutes are much worse than the sugar. And gum chewing is good. It actually is a cerebral pump for your brain. But now I don't chew gum anymore because I can't find any that has just plain sugar unless you want to pay like a designer chewing gum for like $10 a package or whatever. Because I have seen them, but it's really expensive and it's not very good gum either.
Yeah, I recently found like these ginger chews. I think it's an old company, but it's like 10% ginger with cane sugar.
Great.
It's kind of it's kind of cool. Does keto and fasting make lipofuscin worse? Because I know it causes the liberation of free fatty acids from the adipose, right? And if those are built from PUFA, then that's toxic. But when you're fasting or in ketosis, does that make this lipofuscin pigment, the lipoproteins, kind of like activated or anything?
If you do keto and avoid the polyunsaturated fatty acids, you can probably get away with it. There's some problems with it, but it's not so serious. But once you're doing keto and you're taking PUFAs, flax oil or fish oil or anything, then yes, you're in trouble too. Definitely.
Makes sense. Okay. Yeah, I know people doing the carnivore diet. It's so funny. Like everyone's all over the spectrum, you know?
And so with keto, it's uncharted territory. They claim the Inuit did keto, but they didn't. They definitely were not keto. Keto, you can do it by doing a starvation diet. But there is some evidence for keto, which I'm researching now to see that it can have certain effects. What is it that there's some disease they find out it can be beneficial for? But basically, I don't do keto, and because it's experimental, I'm watching to see long-term benefits. And so far, since it's so new and it's never been done before, I'm open to it. If some people have good results with it, I'm not going to complain. Anything can cause anything, and anything can cure anything is one of my maxims.
I love that philosophy of yours. Yeah, and I'm really interested in extreme longevity, and I've heard you talk about people living a really long time, like we don't hear about. And Ray Peat said once that there's basically two main theories of aging. One is like we're like a car and we break down eventually, and that's kind of like the keto track. But then the other track is that we can constantly regenerate indefinitely if we constantly give the body energy to do so. And that's kind of what I've come to, is that it's a self-regenerating machine perpetually. It's not like a car where we have to junk it after 200,000 miles. Or
one car that breaks the rule, the Rolls Royce, that's one that's built to last. But other cars are built to break down. In fact, they do that with water heaters and all kinds of things. And I'm for the longevity factor. They even make people feel guilty for living past a certain age. I've actually seen scientists on YouTube saying how selfish it is that you want to live beyond 100 and stuff. It's time to go when you're 100. Make room. I'm of the philosophy that we can go to the stars. We can become trillions and spread our seed over the universe. And why not? So I'm definitely a longevity, almost a fanatic, I suppose. Longevity, space travel, all of that. I'm into it. The creativity of man is so, they put a cap on it and say, you can't do this and you can't do that. And our history is full of people who did it, They told Zuckerberg he couldn't do Facebook. They told Google they couldn't do that. They said we'd never go to outer space. They said they'd never crack the atom, all that stuff. We'd never fly. And now we're flying all over the place.
It's a great point. Yeah. And I look at it too as elders. Like, I really respect you, Adam. And I think the millennial generation, or there's this social engineering happening where the children are not respecting the older generation. And I've moved towards the opposite of that, where I'm looking at elders and saying, wow, there's so much to learn. There's so much experience there. Not to say, their word is gospel, but generally they know a lot of stuff. People that have had more revolutions around the sun, as you call it.
It's a combination, because a lot of elderly people don't advance. They get stuck at that sheep level and so they don't become good examples. But in a lot of cultures, they had elders who actually accumulated information continuously. They didn't stop growing. Once a person says, this is what it is, this is all the information there is, and that has happened. They've actually said, we found the end of science. Nothing else can be discovered. That has actually been said. And of course, the takeout left behind in the dust, and anyone who respected them as an elder. So the useful creativity is good when a person says no. Like look at Warren Buffett. He's very successful, but Jeff Bezos, he had no idea that Amazon would take off. I think he started it with like $500 or some ridiculous amount of money, and they had no idea that he could be successful with Amazon. So our world is changing, and the thing is, a lot of times these changes are putting us in directions we may not want to go. Look at China for surveillance now. You can't walk down the street in some communities without them giving you, like if you go into a store, they photograph you. If you pick up a bottle of booze, it goes on your record. This person might not be reliable. If you pick up baby diapers, he might be more reliable. His social credit score goes up. Well, our country is getting into that now. The police cars have cameras on them now that photograph all the license plates to keep them in order to see if they can use them later for different things. So they photograph coming and going. As a police car passes you in California here, a lot of them photograph your license from behind, and then they photograph you coming the other way too. In both parked cars and moving cars. That makes me nervous.
We're in sci-fi times for sure. And I'm sure you've seen, Adam, the Google cars with the big camera going down neighborhoods. And sci-fi movies are my favorite. I just saw Brainstorm with Christopher Walken. It's like 84 about VR, virtual reality. And Minority Report's one of my favorite movies, Elysium. And it seems like they're just kind of like showing people this is what we're headed towards.
I love the Minority Report too. One of my favorite movies.
Yeah. And you've also mentioned, I think, Dark City was one of your favorites. Mine too. That's a really good one.
That's a good one. I've seen it multiple times. The thing about the Google too, I live in Montecito, and there's all these celebrities living up there. Well, I can find where they live by using Google. Anyone who just wants to take the time and uses a little trickery can find them. I don't bust their addresses and stuff like that. But there's a lot of people that don't want you to know they even live in these places. And through Google, it's like you're flying over in a drone and you find a property and you see what properties are for sale. You match certain things like 2-bedroom, whatever the acreage is, and you put it together. And pretty soon you get a complete history. I spent a little time just to prove I could do it, but I found some really interesting things about people who own real estate who aren't even supposed to be here, that are actually here and easy to bust. They buy things as trusts. They don't buy it under their celebrity names, either the moguls who run the country or the movie stars. So it's really interesting times. And if you really want to use Google, you can use it for those type of things.
Yeah, I've heard about like bubble cities too, where these really wealthy people want to create their own little, it's like a gated community on steroids. I think they keep out 5G and somehow shield it. And it's kind of scary. It's almost like humans are becoming more and more factory farmed. Like I didn't think it could keep going, but we almost all like have tags.
Yeah, it's really happening. And people, every time I see a technological advance, I think it's good. But at the same time, it has dangers associated. Not only 5G, but right down the road here at UCSB, they're working on 6G, and DARPA is greatly involved, 40%. Then you have the usual suspects, Lockheed, Intel, all those companies are involved in it. God knows what 6G is, 5G, bad enough.
Speaking of Lockheed Martin, like I get a lot of flack, like Matt, there's 20,000 studies on omega-3 benefits. Are you saying that's a conspiracy and they're all wrong? I mean, kind of, right? But it's really who funds the studies. And isn't it Martin Marietta and NASA? Those are the big ones behind the studies.
They started the algae one. They actually invented the genetically altered algae that launched all of those algae. They're all based on this one. So if a person buys an algae and they're told it's natural, it won't make enough DHA. So they have to get their DHA from one of those companies. Now, after they produced this algae and realized there was big money on it, because our space program is underfunded. So this was a way of funding it. But then they spun it off to Martin Marietta, who formed a company, a sub-company called Martech. And Martech now has sold it to Dutch Mining Company. They have another name with their initials. But basically, they own, strangely enough, the cure for yellow fat disease and the cause of it. So they get both sides of it. Monsanto now has the Vista soybean. And what they have done is make it so it doesn't break down and kill the fish in the fish farms with the HUFAs. They take them out, but to hide it, they claim they're taking out the saturated fat. Well, how much saturated fat is in a soybean? Like 2%. So that's a hideout. The biotech magazines make a mistake. They actually think that Monsanto is taking out the omega-6s when they're taking out the omega-3s. They've actually fooled professional biotechnologists and their journals, their peer-reviewed journals. And yet, if you see their YouTube video, they're clear that they are removing omega-3s so that the food that they feed salmon doesn't kill them so quickly.
Wow. Is that related to the linoleic and linolenic wordplay? Because I've seen you speak about that.
I think that's why they make it so one letter, because that's how they fool the biotech magazine. Monsanto's very clearly to use those terms to stay away from omega-3 and omega-6, because most people know what that is. But most people don't know what the difference is between linoleic and linolenic, So that is big news. And so they've got the Vista. Also, what that oil was doing, what the omega-3 was doing in oils in fast food joints was clogging up the machinery. By taking the omega-3s out, they're advertising they don't clog it up anymore. But they're very careful not to use omega-3. Now, if people don't believe this, check it out. They go research it because it is out there on the internet. And it is funny that the biotech magazines, many of them have actually fallen for Monsanto's ploy, maybe deliberately.
That's amazing. So linoleic is omega-3, right? And linolenic is 6?
I believe so. I'm even confused now.
Yeah, their trick worked. That's amazing. Yeah, because you could paint the walls with omega-3s. That's like one of the best uses for them, right?
That's right. It's like, the reason they use flax oil and oils like the fast oils is for varnish, because it's quick drying oils. Well, it's quick drying in the body too, because it oxidizes right away. And just think, you're basically plating your body with it. And in fact, what works, because there are some positive effects from omega-3s, but it's the toxic byproducts of that's causing the result. And what I mean it works, it's like if I have arthritis and I go, say 40 years ago, I could go to a doctor and they would give me radiation like you would for chemotherapy. See, your arthritis is gone. So it really does work, in quotation marks. But what's going to happen within 5 years after it working? So omega-3s does have a temporary effect. In fact, it's the closest thing to radiation. And both Ray Peat and Emmanuel Revisi, who wrote his big textbook on how those oils work, are in agreement about that. Revisi was a radiation expert. He lived to 101, and he was an advisor for the Navy on that. And he clearly said that if you want to get alkaline quickly, just go under a radiation machine or take PUFAs, particularly HUFAs, omega-3s, because he knew omega-6s really didn't do that much. And I'm sure they do bad things, but I'm not an expert on omega-6s, why they do that. And I'm what do you call it, hesitant to start researching it because there's so many lies out there. I haven't figured out where to start and what to believe on that. With omega-3s, though, it's clear. The evidence is really clear. So that's why I'm sticking to omega-3s for a while.
Yeah, and just to clarify for the audience, so when we refer to HUFAs, those are omega-3s, and then PUFAs are a broader category containing omega-3s and 6s, and 7s and 9s. Is that correct?
That's exactly right. Yeah, that's right.
Okay. And that really segues. One question I received from a friend was, I work with customers in a health food store where their skin issues resolve with omega-3s, psoriasis especially. Is this because of suppressed immunity? So it's a short-term benefit that will cause long-term harm? That's kind of my understanding, right?
Yes, exactly what cortisol does. See, cortisol will make you get rid of your skin problems, right? In fact, there's other health food products that work the same way. They're actually hidden cortisol, natural cortisol. I have to think of the names of these things you take for skin and arthritis. It's not coming to me now, but they have other products that are cleverly disguised, and they used to come from the shells of shellfish. Does that ring a bell? And now they come from pig cartilage. And those basically work like cortisol. They are cortisol. And if anyone reads Revisi's 772 medical textbook, they'll clearly see that that's where it comes from, the corticosteroids. And
that's amazing.
Stores.
That's the part that got me about the HUFAs, is that they not only cause stress, but they exacerbate it, right?
Yeah, it's like chemotherapy works to get rid of cancer, but it gives you, about 5 years down the road, you get another cancer. So in a way, you can get positive effects from HUFAs, but they have side effects with them. As they found out, cod liver oil would get rid of people with, a vitamin A deficiency can be very serious. So it would get rid of those deficiencies. But then they started to see when people were taking cod liver oil continuously, they were starting to get brown heart disease. The heart was shrinking up. First, it would expand and get large. Then it would shrink up and shrivel. And many people today don't realize it. By taking all these PUFAs and HUFAs, and including in the food supply, not just the supplement supply, they have shriveled up hearts and shriveled up livers. Yeah. So
and brains.
And brain too. Yeah, shriveled up brains. You bet. It's not just the brain, it's all the organs of the body, the kidneys, all of the tissue, particularly in the ectoderm, the spinal nerves and all that, particularly susceptible to that. When people get age spots on their skin, that's Lipofuscin. They also have it in their liver, their brain. You can see it in the iris. So-called iris markings are often Lipofuscin. Anyone who reads Joseph Deck's iris diagnosis textbooks will clearly see that he was on to that years ago when he wrote those textbooks in the 1960s, that pigment was Lipofuscin.
That's incredible. So you mentioned in previous interviews it affects the lysosomes in the mitochondria. Does it shut down energy production? Is it like throwing a wrench in a machine kind of thing? Or?
Eventually it does. In fact, other names for progressive lipofuscinosis are muscular dystrophy, Lou Gehrig's disease, Parkinson's disease, dementia, both mixed and otherwise, and all of these type of disease. If you investigate them, as I have, to your amazement, you're going to find a lot of lipofuscin is involved. And lipofuscin, again, you can't get it from saturated fat. You can't get it from monounsaturated fat. You can't even get it from omega-6 oils, but you can get them from omega-3s, both in DHA, EPA, and ALA. There they are.
That's incredible. Have you looked into how it alters the pH? Because I know you wrote the book Acidify or Die, which I loved. Does it alter the intracellular pH?
Definitely does. Alkaline breaks us down. Now, why would we need alkaline? Because we need to clear out the old cells to make room for the new ones. So there is a place for it. Catabolism is necessary. By the way, all of our foods, and you can get the U.S. Agricultural Department food list. If you have a list of they have 15, 20 pages of foods, only 5 of them are alkaline. Before they go into your mouth, they're all acid, because otherwise the bacteria would eat them up. That's why an acidic food protects. But once it gets in your mouth, you break it down and the minerals go. So now in an incredibly acid food like a lemon becomes very alkaline because it has all those calcium and magnesium and all the alkalizers. And we need alkalizers because if we just built up our cells, we would become like a rock hard. And alkaline is like water. So we're a colloid in between a rock and water, and that way we can move and function. So alkali isn't bad, acid isn't bad, and the reason I wrote Acidify or Die is to as a rebuttal against a book that you've probably seen called Alkalize or Die. Now here's the humor of the title of that book. You see a beautiful waterfall and you see numerous trees and everything, and that's obviously supposed to be alkaline. Then you see a desert, and that's supposed to be acidified. Well, anybody knows, or most people know, that a desert is an alkali flat. It's not acidic. Go to the Salton Sea, and all those minerals are left over, and you have a dead sea from the alkali. Go to the mountaintops under pine trees. It's too acidic to grow a lot of crops under because the pine tree is so acid. So he has that title. The book cover is totally in reverse, which has always amused me when I first saw that at a bookstore. And it's a really popular selling book. It's still selling for years.
Interesting. Maybe that's why people have longer lifespans on the mountaintops around pine trees, right? It's not only the elevation, but the acidic environment.
I would think so. I think Ray Peat left that part out. But, he probably knows it. I don't want to second guess him like he doesn't know these things, because he knows a lot of things I didn't think he knew. And then when questioned, because I've questioned him on other radio shows with notes, and I found he's missed some things, but he's pretty well on it.
Yeah, I was surprised to hear him talking about the 4th phase of water before anyone, years ago.
Way ahead of that. And I'd come across Gilbert Lennon in the medical library and wanted to follow up on him, but I couldn't find anything at that time until I heard Ray Peat and then got reintroduced to it. And now, of course, it's becoming more and more common with Gerald Pollack and a lot of other scientists getting into it, Thomas Cowan, etc. So, and it's a validity, but to get it, all you have to do, if you're eating a fruit, you're eating basically solidified water, colloid water right there. So you're eating structured water. When people say, I'm selling you structured water, you should be chewing it then, because otherwise it's not really structured. Even liquid water is slightly structured though, but we structure it when it becomes solid. Because how can a carrot, you can squeeze it as much as you want to. It's 97% water, but you're not going to get that water out of it no matter how hard you squeeze it, unless you subject it to cremation temperatures.
Fascinating. Wow. I'm on the raw carrot a day thing, and I feel good from doing that.
We've been doing that too.
I feel it just long term. Yeah. This is a really interesting question. I'm excited to ask you. PUFA reacting with sunlight, sun gazing, sunbathing, because I'm guilty of telling people to do that. Like DHA is a superconductor and it helps to, charge you up, and it reacts with, and it is photosensitive, but unfortunately the light oxidizes it, right? So when that happens in our retina or our skin, from the sun, that's definitely not a good thing. Is that right?
A major cause of cataracts and eye diseases, macular degeneration, is PUFAs involved. And you can check. Now, here's the weird thing. PUFAs make vitamin A toxic because you'll always find in a cataract and macular degeneration excess vitamin A. And vitamin A, we've been taught for years, is really good for your eyes. Well, it is if you eat saturated fat. But if you don't, it becomes part of the process. I've written about that, and also you can find it on the internet. I was really surprised at the vitamin A, though, and I just discovered that about 3 years ago. Yeah.
Wow. So does that mean like beta carotene, like vegans say that aren't doing animal products? I've heard they get like yellow calluses on their hand, and that's like carotenoid poisoning. Is that kind of what you're talking about?
Is it poisoning? Oh, only they say, oh, it's perfectly harmless. Here's the trick. They've divided animal into vitamin A and vegetable into beta carotene. And actually, the younger the plant or the more fruit-like, the more actual vitamin A is in it. It's not beta carotene at all. So they store their vitamin A in the same way that we do. We have to store it somehow. So we store beta carotene. And if you can't use it quickly, it becomes toxic. It's also was well known back in the and this made me suspicious about beta carotene and all the carotenoids, that if you diabetics cannot handle it, cancer patients cannot handle it, and a whole bunch of other diseases. So back in the day, back in the 80s, I would recommend people, if you have any kind of metabolic problem, cancer, arthritis, anything serious, I would go and get your vitamin A directly from some kind of either animal source. And I think they can get sometimes the things you usually get from animals, they get from vegetable source. Look at B12. It's from an animal source, yet when you buy it in the store, it's from a vegetable source. So that's really humorous.
Interesting.
The thing is,
okay.
you have to get the arthritis and the cancer in the first place, then you don't have to worry about the problem. You can eat the beta carotene, and lycopene and others don't seem to accumulate in the same way. There's hundreds of carotenoids, and I became fascinated about that when I discovered them in reading oil technology books, and I mean oil and petroleum. And there, I found these pigments listed in Joseph Deck's iridology books, and just by random, I sometimes go and kind of douse a library. I go into the oil section and open up to all the lipofuscin pigments and all the beta carotene pigments, and how they're so long lasting in the oil industry that the oil industry knew more about it at that time than the health food industry. What's wrong with this picture?
Wow, that's amazing. I know you've written about synthetic astaxanthin. Do you think natural astaxanthin, I mean, I don't take it, but do you think that's also just as bad? Because that natural astaxanthin even accumulates in the tissues, right?
I think a small amount is okay. The body can handle things just like overdoing vitamins. They then can make you acid or alkaline depending on it, like vitamin E and K can make you overacidic. But if you're taking the right amount, they're utilized functionally. They don't have any leftover, so there's no acid or alkaline left over. Not that you can't use a vitamin and make yourself over-alkaline for certain therapy reasons, but you better know why at that point. Which one is D making you acid or alkaline, and D makes you alkaline. So it's good to know these things. Actually, going into the sun, you become alkaline because it releases a catabolic process, tanning and burning, and affecting the adrenal glands. And then you go in after a day and you get a good sleep and it balances all out.
Yeah. Yeah. And thanks for bringing that up, because I want to make clear, I'm not telling people to hide from the sun and wear sunglasses, because that's not good either. It's a balance.
Not at all.
I think but I think staying out all day and sun gazing all day, that's probably not a good idea. Right?
Not a good day, but not a good time. But I used to go to the beach at, golly, I would show up when everybody else was leaving, because your best time for tanning is that point. When I studied heliotherapy with Swami Nitty Gritty, that's a Donald Lay back in Houston, he could actually look at your tan and tell when you got tanned. So he pointed to one of us, you tan in the morning, you tan in midday, and he pointed to me, you're in the afternoon. And I was. That's when I prefer to get my tan, about 4 in the afternoon. He also recommended that certain coasts, depending on the Doppler effect, were beneficial for a tan, If you're in California, you get tanned in the afternoon. If you're in New Jersey, you get tanned in the morning because of the Doppler effect. Now, I have not found research on that because he was so far ahead of the curve. I still find things he said then being discovered today. And that one I haven't discovered yet.
That's incredible. Yeah, I've heard that there's more, the most red light is at, sunrise and sunset, right?
Yeah.
Start and end.
Definitely.
And that's protected.
You can prove that. Actually, we have adopted our color vision. The sky and everything is actually reddish at that point. Now, you get a hint at it when you turn around and look at the shadows at sunset. They're green, the exact complementary color of red. So it kind of fakes us out. But if we had correct vision at that time, we would see a bright red sky, a bright red everything around us. But we have adapted our colors psychologically so much we don't see that. If it was like 2 hours before time, it would be orange. And if it was at high noon, we would see bright blue. Because the blue light that times us, it's a good thing to be out at 11:30 in the morning to be timed by blue. Blue light is very beneficial at that time of day. It is not beneficial at night, obviously, which a lot of people are into nowadays.
Interesting. Wow. You brought up something about earlier vitamin E and vitamin K. I've heard to detox these HUFAs out of the body, and this will wrap up this segment on HUFAs for this interview, it's vitamin E is the main one, right? But also saturated fat and selenium. Do those three help with kind of getting it out of the tissues? So, I mean, it takes years, right?
It does take probably, according to Ray Peat, about 4 years. And then it depends on how many you are putting in. And we also can toxify those agents. Like people often get ulcers by PUFAs. They combine with chloride. The chloride's supposed to make hydrochloric acid and break down into water and vinegar. And it doesn't. It forms toxic oils that are even beyond the PUFA's ability to do that. And then the bicarbonate goes in and becomes toxic. It's supposed to go into the duodenum, and it becomes toxic too. So people under stress, the PUFAs are even worse, much worse at that point. That's why I've noticed that people who have money and happy lives, not just money, but happy lives, live long. Look at Charlie Munger. He's 95 years old. Look at Betty White. She eats nothing but junk food, 97. Look at George Burns and his cigar. He was 100. Now, they probably could have lived longer if they ate healthily too, but they had self-satisfied life. They had money and they were satisfied with it. If you have money, actually, Charlie Munger has said that judges live longer than lawyers. Lawyers are always under stress because they have to prove something. The judge just sits there and says, yes, no, guilty, not guilty. And so they generally live very long. And I've checked that out. A lot of judges do live really long lives, and they don't even have to eat healthy. But if they did eat healthy, they would do a lot better.
I love that. Yeah, I think getting some feedback. Let's see. Testing. Okay, we're good. Yeah, that's what I love about your philosophy. And I've really shifted my thoughts on longevity over the years to where it's more about mitigating stress, lessening stress, and doing what you love to do. I think you said with Patrick Timpone, imagine how many people are actually doing what they want to do truly. And I think you said it's less than 1%. That makes total sense.
I think it really is. In fact, I devised a test. At one point, I met a man who had testicular cancer. And so we did kind of an emotional, find out who was the matter with him. And finally, he was an accountant, very dull, and his father had been a secret agent. So when I found out it was so boring to him to be a accountant, he said, my father never had his term, the balls to be a secret agent. And I said, why don't you be a secret agent? No, I don't want to be that. He didn't like his father. And he had cancer of the left testicle, which is emotional connection with the male. And the father, the color was black, which is the father too. Well, this gets a little complicated here, but when I asked him, what did he want to do then? I mean, he didn't like being an accountant. What did he want to do? And he said, I want to be a color therapist. I said, what are you doing to be a color therapist? He said, I'm going to real estate school. And I said, what? What is that? Well, I get the money to be a color therapist. Well, I've seen many people since then kid themselves with an intermediate step. And then he never became a color therapist. He became a successful realtor in Santa Fe. He never became a color therapist. And it's like when I do an affirmation, I don't do an affirmation to get the job, to make the money to go to the beach. I just go to the beach and skip the middleman. And it's called disintermediation in business. And I like it in life. Do what you want to do as soon as you can do it practically.
I love that. Yeah. That's been my journey. Oh, shoot. Feedback. Let's see. Testing. Yep. That's better. Yeah. Yeah. I love that. That's so cool. And that's what I've realized. I went to community college, and I would ask the students, around me, my colleagues, what are you guys majoring in? And normally the eyes would glaze over and they just weren't excited. It's like, wow, there's something wrong here.
Yeah, it is true. Then I took that test after that, and a friend of mine who is my co-author of Yes, No, Maybe actually is a multimillionaire, and now her family is too. They're in a multi-marketing business, and they do really well. But at one point, I asked her, what would you do if you had this money? I gave her even more money than she had at that time. And she said, you got a couple of days? But you ask a person that has prosperity issues about that, and they will give you the most cockamamie answers. Like, I asked one person, what would you do if you have $20 billion? Well, I'd only work a couple of days a week, and I go to the Caribbean. I said, wait a minute, you got $20 billion? You're still going to work the job you had? Well, I kind of like it. Well, I found a lot of people who supposedly like their jobs don't really like their jobs. They become like the frog, that old analogy. You get in the water and you warm it up, and pretty soon the frog doesn't notice what's happening. Well, a lot of people are living lives like that, and if you muscle test them or body douse them, you'll find they're really not happy with the job they say they're doing. And they're often duplicating what their parents did or someone else gave them a model of, when there's very few people who are really self-satisfied and happy.
Yeah, I found that to be the case too. But that kind of segues perfectly. One question I had, my friend was wondering what your physical activity consists of. And I see this gym obsession. I don't know if you've looked into it, but under blue light, just like constantly working out. Even if they're sick, they drag themselves to the gym to work out. And that could be a way to mitigate stress, right? A lot of people are using that as almost like a drug, but it can make their health issues worse if they're already stressed and tense, right?
It depends if they love going to the gym, their reason. There is an author now, his name escapes me, but he writes a book about barefoot running. And he writes about the Tomara Indians. I'm probably pronouncing that wrong. But anyway, they run as much as 450 miles at one run. It's like a super marathon. And when they're in their 50s. Now, I first read about them in Deepak Chopra, and I took it with a little bit of grain of salt, even though he's often right. But recently, we saw a video of the man who went down there and investigated them. And they when they run races, they run in sandals or barefoot for as much as 450 miles. And an average run, a fun run for them, is 100 miles. And the whole family runs. The wife, the husband, the kids, and the grandfathers, and they can run until old age. In other words, most runners, they start getting aches and pains and things when they do 25-mile runs. And here they're running barefoot or with cheap sandals, the ones you make out of tires, and they're running 100 miles. So, but one of the people investigating them would see them at the toughest part, the toughest cliff, and say, why are they smiling? You look at most runners, they don't look like they're enjoying themselves, even though they claim they're doing it to enjoy themselves. So I suggest investigating these Indians in YouTube videos and see that the joy of what you're doing is what makes you happy. And at this point, I'm not working out at the gym or any exercise. And that's my bad, because I used to love to work out at the gym. I like all the gadgets. Some people say, you're supposed to do natural things. I kind of like a gym. I wouldn't mind owning a gym, frankly, or having a private gym in my house. Because when I was bodybuilding, I liked it and had fun and learned a lot of scientific techniques, because those muscles tie into organ systems. So it becomes very valuable. So you can over-exercise, though.
Yeah, I think Ray is more of a fan of strength training more than aerobics, because I guess aerobics can have a strong effect on the lactic acid production.
He's more for walking and even concentric exercises, where you pull it towards you and you don't let down. Like in bodybuilding, you do get the pain from the eccentric exercises. I think he's gone a little overboard there, because there's a lot of healthy people like a Gypsy Boots. Have you heard of him? Because he was a friend of mine at one time. They were acquaintance, at least. He was a regular. And this guy, in his 80s, he had an 18-year-old girlfriend, and he couldn't sit still. He was jumping around and exercising all the time. He wrote a book called Bare Feet and Good Things to Eat. He slept on a bed of nails sometimes. He swung from the trees. Every hippie gathering or Monterey Jazz Festival, he would show up and swing through the trees like a gorilla. Interesting guy. And so he said, like Jack LaLanne, I'm not gonna rust out. I'm gonna wear out. And they did. They kept their word. I met Jack LaLanne finally too. They were inspirational characters, and they exercised a lot and loved it.
That's awesome. Yeah, I guess my current belief system is like, whether you're sedentary or working out a lot, as long as you're loving what you're doing, the body can maintain itself. It's kind of like a mind over matter type of thing. I don't know. That's my current kind of theory.
I found historic validations that some people, the longest lived person I found was 155 years old. Now, I've heard of other people 300. I can't validate that. But there actually has been validation of people living into their 130s, 140s. Master Chen, Wudan Chen, his master woman lasted 130. That's not supposed to happen. The scientists will not, they don't have a driver's license or a passport. They can't prove it. But I believe that it's true. Ray Peat has investigated that too. One of the characters that I found, he mentioned. And also a man who lived on oranges and lived to 130 or so, he cites that. I haven't documented that one, but he apparently has. So I think we're being sold a bill of goods. I think between our mental force and loving life, and also our nutrition, that we can live a lot longer. As my teacher, Swami Nitty Gritty, said, we sell ourselves short. And I really believe we do.
Yeah, well said, for sure. So someone wants me to have you run through your typical day in your life, sleep time, eating times, amounts, how old you are. I guess that's kind of everything.
77 revolutions around the sun. And we eat probably overly simplified, because we have access to one of the best farmers markets in the world. So we probably get 95% of our food there. The only things we don't are maybe organic maple syrup, something like that. And my white sugar now that I get in the regular supermarket for the first time. The first time I've been in a market for 3 years was to get white sugar, and also diamond crystal salt, which is also a pure salt with nothing else in it. But anyway, we'll start with like soaked almonds, fruit of whatever's in season, like chirimoya, persimmon. We eat barhi dates. I don't know if you've ever tasted a barhi date, but they are really good. And a couple other nuts like pistachios, cashews, a walnut, sometimes a pecan. Just a few of them, because you don't want too many of them at the same time. And we eat walnuts even though they have omega-3s in, because they have other beneficial things in. They look like a brain. They help the brain. And they also, the vitamin E in that, and particularly in almonds, buffers us from that. And then we have an orange. since listening to Ray Peat. We're big on oranges at spleen pancreas time. Now, he doesn't go into circadian rhythms. So we eat our breakfast at stomach time between 7 and 9 in the morning. This is off of the acupuncture clock that people may or may not be familiar with. And then we have an orange at about, say, 11 o'clock. And then we have our lunch somewhere about small intestine time between 1 and 3, which lately has been a fruito vegetable, something like zucchini. We eat kale because it's so rich in K and other things. Cauliflower. We cook them, so we get as little goitrogen as possible. We add butter. I have some cheese with that. And let's see what. Oh, I have black lentils. Ray Peat would not approve, but I find that one of the oldest people on the planet, the Turban Tornado, who used to run 25-mile races when he was in his hundreds, he did well by eating it most of his life. So I do eat some of those. We cook them well. We sprout them because Ray Peat at one point said if you sprout these things, they're not as toxic or not even toxic sometimes. And then we have a snack in the afternoon, which can vary. Sometimes it's strawberries, something of that nature, usually with some cream because the fat-soluble vitamins in the strawberries or the fruit are going to be absorbed. And then for dinner, we're really big on potatoes. We eat a lot of dextrinized potatoes. We bake it without the foil. We eat eggs in butter. And I use a little coconut oil at a time because it just works well as a supplement with the butter. And we have beets and the carrot salad and onion and garlic and things like that. I'm probably forgetting a few things, but we eat more simply. You could actually eat in restaurants if you were really clever about it. And I used to travel a lot, and that was my alternative. I was eating in restaurants. So Swami Nitty Gritty showed me how to don't ask the waitress or the waiter, ask the cook what he can make for you. And then you'd be surprised what you can get, you know. So I don't want people to think that you have to eat as pure as we do. We've just gotten used to it. We avoid supermarkets. We go once a week to the farmer's market here in town. We stock up and we buy from people we know. We know the farmers, the integrity of them, and so we're really fortunate. A lot of people do your best to buy organic. A lot of organic food is not organic. You know, it's a fake. But still, by buying organic, you can do pretty well, and even eating in restaurants.
Yeah, that's pretty similar to what I do, minus the nuts and seeds, because I guess I'm trying to do a HUFA detox.
We don't, unfortunately, have like the sunflower seeds and all of those seeds, but we do eat some nuts, and we keep them to a minimum and in the morning too, and make sure that the almond is there, which is very rich in vitamin E. Pistachio is too, and we make sure kale and other vegetables that have E in it are done during the day so that we can get away with it. But
yeah.
Ray Peat would not approve of that. And I do eat avocados, though I've been having second thoughts about it. But I just do love avocado. And it is a monosaturated oil mostly. So it's very close to olive oil I've investigated. And I'd like to have a conversation with Ray Peat about what else is there about avocado that's incorrect.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I loved what you said about sprouting. I used to sprout, and I used to be a raw foodist for like 4 years. And what are your thoughts on sprouted pumpkin seeds as a source of zinc?
You know, even I think they can work, and Ray Peat seems to be for sprouting, so you could probably get away with it. He has said clearly, I've heard him say that once you sprout a seed, the defense chemicals are virtually gone and it's ready to go. And I remember one time a guy came to me with a prostate problem at the health food store here locally. And I told him about those because he came for, he was taking some kind of an opiate for the pain. And so he was coming for prune juice so his bowels would move. So when I told him about the seeds, he looks at his buddy and says, so pumpkin seeds are going to fix my prostate. Okay. He said, oh, give me a bag. What the heck? So he took a bag. He calls me back 2 hours later and says, The pain is completely gone. It says, save some more of the, how many bags you got? Hold them for me. I'll be right down. So anyway, I think they actually do have an effect on a man's prostate. He needs both copper and zinc. Too much zinc in supplement form can actually cause problems. But getting it from a natural source like pumpkin seeds, I think they can be very valuable, yeah. And particularly if you sprout them.
That's fascinating. Yeah. I had a friend get rid of dandruff recently. I think it only took a week with selenium and zinc. Because I find mineral imbalance can cause a lot of these health issues. They
can definitely. And selenium, zinc, and vitamin E are definitely true antioxidants that are effective. Some other antioxidants are actually toxins too. They don't tell you that. I'm trying to think of the one that begins with an O. If you look at, it's sold in this health food store as an antioxidant. And if you look in any poison book, it's listed as a carcinogen. I thought that's interesting because it's advertised as an anti-carcinogen.
Interesting. Wow. Yeah, there's a lot of that.
I'm spacing on
it. Kind of on the same topic, my friend was asking, are oats estrogenic, and does sprouting help with absorption with oats?
They help. You know, the Scots were big on oats, and they built some of the strongest men in the world, including William Bankier, the Scottish Apollo or whatever he went by. And he lifted an elephant, actually. But now he lifted it on a platform where he was above it, and then with a rope, he stood up with his legs and lifted an elephant with a rider on it. And he was a complete vegetarian, and oats was part of his program. They did a study, though, interesting enough. This has been repressed, though you can find it on Wikipedia. A scientist back in the day wondered what individuals' grains would do. So he gave nothing but wheat to cows and to pregnant cows. He gave oats to them. He gave corn to them, and he gave mixed. And only the pure corn diet ones thrived. The rest of them couldn't have babies, and they started dying out on just those grains alone. So corn tends to be the best one. I wondered about that, and Ray Peat actually said the same thing yesterday on a radio show, where he said the exact same thing, that corn was the better grain if you were going to do it. I have not found any case of yellow fat disease from corn, but of course now I'm not talking about GMO corn. I'm not talking about high fructose corn syrup or any of those things. They've basically made a frankenfood out of most corn. But pure corn can have some benefits, only I certainly wouldn't take corn oil anymore unless I was cleaning my small intestine, which that could work if you took a large amount and you just wanted to go through your body. It can actually get some muck out of your small intestine. And I've done that twice before.
Fascinating. Wow. So it's like even a poison could be a medicine at certain times or in certain contexts, I guess is a better way to say it.
Exactly. When Ray Peat was interviewed about flax oil, he said at one time the person who devised the cottage cheese and flax oil diet, she used the flax oil as a cleanse. But then when it became popular like a health item, they started shrinking up the amount of it. And he said it was okay if you use it for an occasional cleanse because it will cause diarrhea and clean out your intestines. But at the time, the diet down there in Mexico, whatever it is where they treat people down in Mexico, there were no oils in it at all. They added the oils after he died. And that's, kind of disingenuous. So things in small amounts, one-time deal, can sometimes be beneficial. They call the name hermetics. In other words, you take a toxin. Basically, it's homeopathy, if you want to put it that way. If you get a burn, you put your hand back in boiling water really quickly, and the burn heals much faster than if you put ice on it. So there is a point for some of these things for therapies, but continuously as a food, that's where people get in trouble.
That makes sense. Yeah. And our last question from friends, carbohydrate sourcing pre-agriculture. I get this a lot with the high sugar diet that, people say it depends on your geography, where you live. Pre-agriculture, we wouldn't have had access to large amounts of sugar. Have you looked into that, like the history of carbohydrate diets? And, because the paleo-keto argument is that we were in ketosis a lot of the time and we didn't have sugar.
Ketosis is very rare. They claim that the Inuit were in it, but the Inuit weren't really in it. However, we were in ketosis during starvation. If you can't get food for a couple of days, then definitely you're in ketosis. You start eating your own body at that point. They claim, in quotations, that you can't get that muscle mass back. I think you can get anything back. It may be just a little tougher, and they don't know about it. So it was, but many times our ancestors had access to fruit, and they often ate large amounts of it and often fluctuated in weight. Now, I don't know how healthy that was, but some of the Indians in Arizona would actually gain 100 pounds during that season and then use that storage fat for times of starvation when there was less food available. There have been meat eaters, but paleo can mean anything, because if you were in the tropics, many of the natives there, they just ate potatoes, and they ate, I think in one island of New Guinea, they had 69 different varieties of potatoes that had grown, sweet potatoes, yams, all kinds of batatas blancas, you name them they had. And they ate very little meat, except for an occasional human being, because they were cannibals once in a while. Ate their enemies for the heart and things like that. Otherwise, it's all vegetables. So it varied. A good example of what humans do and what bears do. You have a polar bear, almost 100% carnivore. Then you have a panda bear, almost 100%, actually 100% vegan, eating nothing but bamboo shoots. And then in the latitudes in between, you have bears that eat salmon, and they eat a bunch of berries and cranberries and things like that too. Human beings were the same. We don't seem to have a common, we're really omnivores, where we can eat just about everything. You may have heard of Mr. Eatsall, who ate a Cessna airplane. It took him 2 years, and he was digesting the metals, which are inorganic metals out of a plane with all the toxins. He ate a number of shopping carts. He ate a coffin. He ate bicycles. And he lived till 59, which is a miracle he lived that long. And he died from a knife wound. Now, my question is, because I don't know, did he die from an external knife wound or an internal knife wound from eating the knife? That's my question. Anyway, we're omnivores, and we have been in ketosis at times. We obviously have the backup thing. We run on fats when we do marathon races, so we have it to do. I think mostly we run on sugar. But I think we have that as a backup plan. And I think we have other backup plans that we don't even know about, that science isn't either telling us about or doesn't know about, or both.
Interesting. Yeah. Oh, feedback again. Sorry.
Okay.
Yeah. Let me see. I'm still getting it. Okay, we're good. And with the backup system, we probably are not meant to oxidize PUFA, are probably meant to oxidize saturated fat, right? And so their backup systems kind of changed now, and that's probably why we see so much disease.
A lot of it's climate. One of the questions to ask is, if DHA is so important, why does a salmon, very, very rich in DHA and EPA, live only 9 years at the maximum, while an orange roughy, the lowest on the scale, almost no DHA at all, lives to 149 years according to Wikipedia and 300 according to Ray Peak? That's a question to answer. But here's another thing. If you're in the cold and in the dark, DHA becomes an asset. There is actually a shark in the Arctic that lives for 500 years. And it's like, if I go up in the mountains, I want 10 weight oil. If I come down into the tropics, I want 30 or 40 weight oil. It's the same principle that omega-3 can be a benefit if you're in the dark, under pressure, and in the cold. But once you get out of pressure and you feed a salmon that's used to be in a deep fish, omega-3s, the same oil that helps them in the ocean kills them when they're in warmer water like they are in these farms. And that's why they have such a trouble with they feed omega-3s to the salmon and they die. That's why the Vista soybean by Monsanto is to correct that problem by having a non-omega-3 oil in the feed, because it was the soy oil with the omega-3 that was killing them. They have a corn and soy. The corn wasn't killing the fish, but the soy was. So now they have adapted a special soy that they're going to use in junk food restaurants and all the fish foods in America, in the world. It's been approved by China, the European Union, and Monsanto or Bayer now is going to make a fortune on the Vista soybean, unless they get busted, which I don't think they will.
That's incredible. That makes me think of polar bears in hibernation, right? Because they're in darkness, they're in cold, and then that might be their strategy to detox the PUFA when they're in hibernation and they have serotonin and melatonin going.
They do, yes, they do, and even in the north, the Inuits they actually need saturated fats from. They eat the thyroid of the animals, the thyroid of the fish, the eyes of the fish, and the organs of the fish to get that. In the book People of the Deer by Farley Mowat, he's the one who wrote Never Cry Wolf and books like that. He said that he fought with the Canadian government who wanted to give the Inuit fish nets, and he said it's going to kill them because they know better than to use the nets. And the government couldn't figure out why the Inuit wouldn't eat the fish, because they knew they needed saturated fats from the caribou, and the fish would actually kill them, and they would rather starve to death, that it was a more painful death to die by PUFAs, and they actually knew that. And this is in the book, People of the Deer, for anybody to read, and it's tangentially mentioned even in the book Never Cry Wolf, but more mentioned in People of the Deer. So they knew about it. They ate saturated fat and knew for survival you're going to eat salmon, you're going to eat food like that. But if you eat a straight diet of it, they were going to die a miserable death.
That is fascinating. Wow. So, Adam, if you have time, maybe like 20 more minutes or so, I have just a bunch of questions we can kind of just go through quickly that I came up with. Okay. Yeah. Just interesting questions to ask you that should be fun. So, potatoes, I'm a big fan. I eat them almost every day with butter or ghee and sea salt. And I remember in an interview, you said that they're a complete protein when they combine with the ammonia in our body. Is there a book I can look for that's fascinating to me. I think that's super cool.
We have to pump Ray Pete's brain on that, because there is some evidence of it. You know, Kellogg used to recommend the potato for the high protein content way back in the day. He wrote extensively about it. But the idea that we make actually ketones in our body that are absorbed by combining with what are they? They're like semi-proteins in the potato, and they grow. Now, potato also has its own protein too, but they actually combine, and that wipes out the extra ammonia in your body. And so for people with kidney problems, now the people in the medical profession say the exact opposite. Don't eat potatoes, it's high in potassium and your kidneys will accumulate. So I'd like to hear more case histories that Ray Pete has on that, because obviously he knows a lot about that. Some of the people on his site, because he has these kind of discussion groups, they say they've never heard of such a thing. And I haven't found I found semi-information on it. For one, the people who wrote, one of the people who started the Heritage Seed Company wrote a book and found out that nobody had ever checked vegetables for free-form amino acids. They just checked for complete protein. Now, bodybuilders, I used to sell injectable grade free-form amino acids to bodybuilders for like $50 a bottle, and they would buy them up in the Portland area. And then imagine my surprise when I read this book and found out the tomato is full of free-form amino acids, And the Burbank tomato particularly is the richest in it. So you don't have to go either inject them or they would often take the injectable grade and take them by mouth because they were a little fresher than the laboratory grade free-form amino acids. So anyway, no one had ever done that test. It was simply done. I haven't heard much of it, and I have to look up that book and find it again because it's in my bibliography. Someplace I have it. And to me, I found the concept amazing. And it matches a lot of what Ray Peat is into. So I think that's one of the secrets of the potato, that somehow there's free-form amino acids in there or semi-fragments that join with the ammonia in our own body to create it, just like he says.
That's incredible. I think they're keto proteins maybe, and I heard orange juice has some as well.
I think I heard him say that too. And he said that a lot of fruit just hasn't been investigated, but he suspects it's in a lot of plant matter.
That's amazing. That's a good transition into this question. Do you think fruitarianism can work? Because my big concern is the fat-soluble vitamins. But do you think fruitarianism could work long-term? I've just seen so many issues, and I'm wondering why that is.
Ray Peat actually says it can, but he warns about it. Unless you know exactly what you do and there's no omega-3s in the picture, forget about it. Because if you eat nothing but sugars, you will make your own fat and your own cholesterol in your liver, and you will make oleic acid, which is the main fat we're supposed to get, and that can further divide into other fats that we need. And so you can do it. But as soon as you throw PUFAs and HUFAs into the mix, you've lost it. So that's why veganism can be dangerous. And I agree with some of the paleo people that there's never been a fifth generation vegan. Probably if we get scientific enough and can really do measurements, there can be. And Ray Peat believes there can be. And I do too. But I'm not going to go there because frankly, this body didn't come with a manual explaining exactly how it works. And so we're dependent on Stone Age science. Imagine 1,000 years from now, they'll laugh at us. If we're still on this planet, if mankind doesn't blow themselves up, we'll be laughing at what they knew about the body today.
That's true. That's a good point.
And look, was right, and it's the descent of man instead of the ascent of man.
Coffee health benefits, because I drink it every day, and I'll put MCT oil, heavy cream, maple syrup, thanks to you. The benefits of coffee and coffee enemas, I think you've delved pretty deep into that, right?
You know, I was in my 40s when Nitty Gritty talked me into drinking coffee, and I didn't like coffee. I didn't like the taste of it at all. So first he had us do coffee with either salt or sugar for certain reasons, and we only did it on Mondays and Thursdays. So I started drinking it, and it was okay. Then he came up with cobalamin tonic, and it's been beneficial to me, but some women, it's actually started their periods again in their 60s. And so you have to be aware of certain things about it. He claimed it was a hormone booster rocket and gave us, it potentialized B12. I don't think there's actually B12 in the coffee. There is evidence of being some B12 in the cocoa or the cacao. So I've been drinking it ever since, and more studies. When it was bad, it gave you breast cancer, it gave you this, it gave you that, etc. I went to a medical library, and I couldn't find any of the evidence in all of the books that did all the lab work. And so that confused me. And I was drinking coffee already anyway, but I wanted to see what was bad about it. And the only thing I could find was that you could get a slight increase in bladder cancer, but it turned out to be the fluoride in the water that was making the coffee and not the coffee. So now coffee has been involved in, it actually lowers blood pressure, doesn't raise it. It works for Parkinson's disease, lists of disease, cancers, gout, all kinds of things. And I can add personally the flu to it now too. So, I think it's actually a miracle food. And it is a food, as Ray Peat said, if you take it with something. If you drink it by itself, then you get a drug-like effect from the caffeine. And it doesn't acidify your body. It's an alkaloid. Caffeine is an alkaloid. How's that going to work? In fact, there's more caffeic acid in an apple than there is in coffee. And according to Emmanuel Ravisi, it's one of the few foods that it neutralizes your body. There's no acid reaction, no alkaline reaction. And the acids in coffee are an industry term. It means, you ever heard the term pop? That food has pop. That's what it means. It doesn't have anything to do with acid or alkaline.
That's fascinating. Wow. And it has an inhibitory effect on iron, because I've read this book called Dumping Iron that was really good. And iron and PUFA, it's my understanding that makes a lot of things more toxic. So those are really powerful oxidizers.
Iron is PUFA's machine gun. Don't arm it.
Interesting. It's a good way to put it. And you're really big into distilled water. I've tried well, spring, reverse osmosis, and I recently came full circle back to distilled water. And I know, I think Ray talks about, not drinking a ton of water. And I think when you eat carbs, you're actually using 50% less water during the oxidative process of sugar. But why do you drink distilled water? I was just curious, because I've heard it dissolves the inorganic minerals and it has an effect on.
Strangely enough, though I use a base of the distilled water, I don't drink it distilled because I soak things in it. So I drink my coffee with distilled water. I soak my almonds in distilled water. We make our soups with distilled water. We make our lemon juice with distilled water. Whatever we're doing, I don't drink it plain. Even Donald Lay said, use distilled water, like for your battery, but don't drink it plain, mix it with something. So I've been doing that for years, doing it that way. And spring water can be okay, but you need to investigate the spring, because a lot of springs, people who drink well water, for instance, in India, there's 1 million deaths per year from fluoride. 1 million deaths. I think it's even more than that, but I'm maybe being conservative about it, because when the WHO came in and tried to help the Indians, they dug the wells too deep, and there's a lot of fluoride at deeper levels, and these people were being poisoned by the millions. So that's what you have to make sure. Is your spring water in a volcanic area? What's in the spring water? But otherwise, spring water can be good. I drank it up in Sedona, where people had been doing it for years. There was a special well up in the Oak Creek Canyon. We'd go up and get bottles of it in glass bottles and bring it down and use it. And I'm still alive, so I guess it's okay. I think you just have to make sure you know what's in that well and that it isn't being polluted from a mining company or a volcanic area or something that has radioactive minerals. Right here, some of the spring water is radioactive, which they used to sell as a health food. They used to put it in bottles. This is radioactive water. Because of the type of radioactivity, by the time it would reach the consumer, though, a lot of the radiation would be lost, fortunately, for those people. So yes, no, maybe. I mean, spring water is not going to kill you, and I think it can be beneficial in many cases. But you should be careful that it's not loaded with fluoride, natural fluoride, or other toxic minerals.
Well said. Let me see. I'm getting an echo again. Sorry, Adam. This is going to be a heavy editing one. It's okay. Yeah, I've also heard fracking is a big deal with springs and aquifers. That kind of leads me to this one. I have a far infrared sauna that I sweat in, and I actually ozonate. So I'll saturate the water with ozone, and I'll drink 2 of those in the sauna. What are your thoughts on drinking? On sweating in a sauna and ozonated water, if you looked into that.
Sweating can be beneficial. Yes, you make yourself alkaline. No, excuse me. You acidify yourself when you go into a sauna, and that can be good or bad. It depends on what you're attempting to accomplish. But certainly, sweating is good. I've used more hot tubs in my experience. I used to do it. I used to love to go into the hot tub and then jump into the cold pool and then back and forth. I think there's value in that cold, hot for your circulation. So I think it could be beneficial. Yeah.
Awesome. And that I used to do 55-degree cold baths when I was getting into this, quantum health stuff. And I think you wrote in one of your ebooks that CT or cold thermogenesis can have a negative effect on the lipofuscin.
It can. Cold makes you alkaline, and sometimes rapidly. However, Jack LaLanne lay in a bathtub full of ice cubes. And a friend of mine named Rico Cavaglia, he's a fitness instructor down your way. You're down near San Diego, aren't you? Someplace.
Yep.
He told Jack, "You're crazy to do that," but Jack LaLanne did it. He said he's almost died in that bathtub sometimes because he would condition himself like to make his famous swim from Alcatraz, with chained hands and chained feet, and swim to shore when they have Alcatraz because he would die in the currents. He swam to shore with handcuffs and leg cuffs. So go figure. This guy was phenomenal. So he did a lot of cold water swimming. And I think on his 85th birthday, he towed 85 tugboats with people in them with his teeth and handcuffed too. I think he was handcuffed for that one. This guy was like from outer space. It can be beneficial, in other words, but you can get into trouble sometimes. You can go into shock. All in all, I think this, what do they call them? The polar bears, January 1st. I've done a lot of cold water swimming in the ocean here, and I think it was beneficial for my health. I think you can overdo it, but it can be fun too.
Yeah, it definitely was like a drug. I would remember I would do it naked in the sun, grounded in like a galvanized steel tank. And I would just feel this like buzz that would start like clockwork 2 hours later. And it would last sometimes 6, 8 hours throughout the day. And it would feel like I took a stimulant drug or something.
I found a secret to keeping warm in cold weather is to take a cold shower. You start with a hot shower, then you finish off with an ice cold shower. And one time there was a workshop going on in Santa Fe, New Mexico. And so I took my cold shower, and then I went out in a Speedo bathing suit and lay in the snow in a bench snowing. And the people coming to the workshop would look at me like I was a nut, which I probably was. But I did the whole workshop with a Speedo and inside and outside. And I found out it gave me amazing heat, internal heat, tumo, I think they call it. And I was definitely generating tumo then and experimenting with it. So I think there can be benefits to it. The U.S. Navy, when I was in high school, they had an article in Reader's Digest that if you put cold water on your hips, it would improve your eyesight, and fighter pilots would do that to improve their eyesight and would have long-term results. So from the time I was in high school, I started those finish off the shower with a cold shower and not a hot one. It supposedly closes the skin pores and things like that. So I'm a big fan of ending my shower with cold water to this day.
That's awesome. Yeah, that the mechanisms behind it working, I used to think it was, I had all these thoughts of easy water and building the fourth phase and membranes and pumps. And I just wanted to ask you to kind of summarize your thoughts on cell membranes and pumps, because a lot of people use that to describe, the EFAs are necessary because they're part of the cell membrane. And you're saying there are no membranes, right? Or it's never really been proven?
There's not just Gilbert Lane, Ray P., Mawan Ho, and a whole bunch of other authorities have had that opinion, but it's never really been validated. And I've gone through a lot of literature, and I don't think there's any such thing. I think the receptor, I always was suspicious of those charts you would see in the medical books. This pushes this, pushes this, pushes this. This is the Krebs cycle. This is that. I don't think they really know that stuff. I think it's fiction. I don't believe in sodium pumps, vitamin D pumps, all of those pumps. As Gerald Pollack has said, there's not enough energy in the cell to drive such fictional pumps. And I don't believe there's a bilayered membrane. There's some kind of a wall, but it can be like Ray Peat says, like structured water has like almost like a crust. That's why small bugs and water bugs and stuff can actually walk on top of it. And I think there's a lizard that runs across the water too. I believe, yes, there is one. And so there's strong evidence for Gilbert Ling. I also think that the science is wrong about a host of other things, and that most of what I learned in high school when they gave you your, physiology is false. And I find something new that was lied about, especially going through the old books. The old books were closer to what they know today. Back in the day, doctors would take and they could percuss you. They could like hit you with their hand, and they could not tell just if your intestines were blocked or your heart was working. They could actually tell almost anything about your body better than a CAT scan or an MRI can do today. And that was amazing to me. Years ago, I got a hold of one of those old books, and it inspired me. And since then, you can find those books on the internet, what they knew about the body. So they knew a lot of things that they have forgotten today. You do like an enzyme test, they don't mean anything. In fact, one of the ones for liver toxicity is the old one for urine for colon toxicity. And the guy who wrote The Zone brought that up, that they've totally ignored that test. So they've taken some almost valid tests, distorted them into things they aren't. And look at the thyroid test. It's totally BS. And the limits they set, as well as the tests, are often incorrect. Through VC, we know that if there's iron either missing or excess, did it come through the mouth, or did it come from the cell into the serum, or the serum into the cell? Where is it hiding? Like, if lactic acid, no, actually, if you exercise heavily and it's not lactic acid, but it's minute muscle tears, which is what you're going to find it is now. How come I did a Sufi workshop with Adnan Sarhan from 10 a.m. to 1 a.m. the following day, straight through, with only dates, no other food. And I was so stiff the next day, it took me like 20 minutes to a half hour to get out of bed. So I went to the workshop for the second day, and I thought, surely he's going to take us easy on us today. And he didn't. We did the same thing, and by moving, I was all clear. Now, what's that? Occam's razor? If you hear hoofbeats, think horses, not zebras. Did it mean that I miraculously healed all those mini breaks in my cell? Or did I really move the lactic acid to another place? Because I wasn't stiff after. The second day, I had no stiffness. So what exactly happened there? And I don't think conventional science has answers for questions like that.
I love it. Yeah, Ray Pete says science is kind of like a priesthood, or I think it was Maywan Ho said science is like a priesthood where everyone kind of, you have to believe this.
Really. He's very down on biologists and loves to, he's a very polite man. He doesn't come out and call people total idiots, but he goes around the bush, and he's not very fond of chemists and biologists at all. And of course, in school, he was against everything he was learning, just about everything, and did his own experiments and proved. By the way, he proved to one of his chemistry professors that the membrane wasn't there by getting the same reading by filling it with mercury, the cell. I don't know if you remember that story or not. And of course, the teacher wouldn't talk to him after that.
Yeah, I remember he said he put an electrode in the cell, and every part of the cell had a different electric potential. And if there was a membrane, then it would all be uniform throughout the entire cell.
That was the test, yeah.
Wow.
So I really think Gilbert Ling is correct. I think he's 100 years old now, 99 or 100. He's still alive. And I think, I think we've learned all these receptors, as Ray Pete says, too, for convenience, so that they can sell you the drug, that like estrogen receptor, and it doesn't go to other places in your body. But of course, it's a general stress hormone, and it's necessary for pregnancy, but other times in your life. Why don't men who don't have estrogen have all this bone loss if estrogen is so important to women? So I think they kill millions of women and make them sick by prescribing estrogen.
That's super interesting. Yeah, I've started to dive into the hormones in DHEA, pregnenolone, progesterone, and serotonin and estrogen being toxic is like a new thing for me in the last 6 months. I'm just like, wow, it's a total perspective shift.
When you think about it, serotonin is supposed to calm you down. Then my question is, why, when you touch a nettle, a stinging nettle, and get stung, that's serotonin. Why, when that what was that creature that killed the crocodile whisperer or whatever his name was, that stung him in the heart?
Oh yeah,
that was serotonin.
Stingray.
And why do wasps have serotonin? And hundreds of different types of poisonous elements use serotonin as the main poison in their poison, and it makes you experience pain. Well, if that's such a sedative, why is it making pain in people? So yeah, there's a lot wrong with serotonin. I was suspicious of serotonin a long time ago. Actually, in the 80s, I became suspicious of it because meditation, according to Swami Nitty Gritty, is a sympathetic nervous system effect, not a parasympathetic effect. So I began investigating it, and right at the beginning, I knew something was wrong with the serotonin reuptake inhibitor, all that kind of stuff. That's a bunch of baloney, yeah.
Wow,
So
interesting.
I was Ray Pete when he said serotonin. I said yes. Nitric oxide surprised me. I fell for that, but there's adequate evidence that it's the ingredient in smog, which I did wonder about. But I figured, well, you know, it's a two-edged sword, like the oxygen paradise. But now I also believe that nitric oxide is another toxin. Seriously. Viagra.
Yeah. I was going to ask. It's necessary for an erection, but probably in short-term dosages, right? But bodybuilders will use it to get the pump and take arginine, citrulline, and all these things that increase it.
Carbon dioxide is necessary for the pump in the penis. If you get it, but carbon dioxide is the way to do it. So if you load up on it, now Pete does it any time of day. I learned from Swami Nitty Gritty. He claims you can have a heart attack by too much carbon dioxide at noon. So he would recommend once the sun went down, then if a person has a heart attack, give them, let me think about this. Whoa. Yeah, give them carbon dioxide at night. Let's see. Anyway, take carbon dioxide at night. Yeah, you want you do your bag breathing, and I often sleep with my head under the pillow now. It makes sugar, and it's related to Decay breathing, which was really invented by the American Indians, by the way, and written about in the 1880s by George Catlin, the famous Indian artist. He wrote a book about basically Buteyko breathing. Of course, not under that name because Buteyko wasn't even born yet. But it's been known for a long time that holding the breath, like Ray Pete is not for yawning, but when I talk about yawning, and I might have this conversation, I'm talking about extended yawning called Kriya breathing, where you actually have an oxygen debt and the carbon dioxide comes into effect. If you do a 6-second yawn, it's like nothing gained, nothing lost. But once you go into 7 seconds and beyond, you start to build up carbon dioxide. And so then I do that mostly at night. And once in a while, just to stabilize myself, I do it during the day too.
Yeah, that's one of the things that I'm fascinated by that you speak about is yawning and stretching release trauma. It's like taking the top off a kettle, right? Or releasing the steam.
When we say we're under pressure, we really are. It's physical pressure. And the only way to yawn, to get it out, mainly is through the anus or through the mouth. It's the only two orifices. However, have you ever blown your nose and you can feel air come out of your eyes and sometimes to the ears? So there are minor other ways of getting it out. And there is a small amount of carbon dioxide and oxygen release through the skin. But I think it's 1 part to 270 parts a lung. So it's rather minor. But still, we do breathe through our skins. And I believe experienced yogis have mastered the art of breathing through their skin. They can actually do it without the lungs. I found it hard to believe that a man was actually buried for 40 days in a tomb with no oxygen and he survived. But I heard that story and was highly critical of it until I found the British military records that validated that this guy did it. And not only that, but several other yogis had done it, in fact, quite a few, and that a British colonel, his name escapes me right now, actually learned the technique and could be buried for a few days without breathing. So, but he was
Wow.
in oxygen someplace. Now, Swami Nitty Gritty went so far as saying one atom of oxygen could last somebody for 40 days if they knew what they were doing. I don't know what I'm doing, so I can't do that. And I never heard of that extreme case, but who knows? These Indians were doing it like as a way of making a living. Look, bury me, I can prove it. And the British, they thought, this ignorant savage, we'll kill him. He's going to die. Well, they were so amazed. They had a guard there every day to make sure no one was going to do any trickery or dig them out of the hole. And they fired guns. The Raja of India was there. The head of the British forces was there. This is all validated and was definitely a controlled experiment. And then they did other ones after that, too. The British were absolutely flabbergasted that was possible.
It's like David Copperfield.
Yeah, it's like David Copperfield, only this looks for real. You have to be really tricky with when you get into things like that. Magicians can, I don't know if you're familiar with Scarn. Scarn actually, who didn't believe in any psychic phenomena or anything, but he went to Bugsy Siegel when he had the flamingo and said, pick a card. Then he threw the deck against the window, and his card was up against the glass, only it was outside the window. And he swore, no, this is a magic trick. It's not voodoo or anything like that. And Bugsy Siegel, how did you do it? He said, I'm a magician. I'm not going to tell you how I did it. But it can be done that we have no explanation for. It can be done like that, the Houdini type effect. But there are other things I've seen where it was done over a distance. And you can't make phenomena like that happen over 1,000 miles in any David Copperfield way that I know of. And I've experienced a lot of those type of things. So I know there's paranormal, supernatural, whatever you want to call it. Donald Lay preferred to call it just the science that we don't know yet, that we haven't investigated because we haven't got to that level of magnetics, electricity, barometric pressure, butterfly effect, all those things yet. But we may get there one day.
I think we will. Yeah, the spike one gets me where they're like balancing on a huge spear. Freaks me out.
Yes, the yogis do have many tricks. You know, I hung around also with Hugging Saint. Have you heard of her, Amara? This lady, if you ever get a hug, she really can do supernatural things. I've had experiences with her where she actually turned into Ganesh, the elephant god. Now, I looked at her and thought, this is an LSD flashback from my past, obviously. It's in my head. But then my girlfriend, who knew nothing about Indian mythology, she's beside me and she says, oh my God, she's growing a trunk. She's turning into an elephant. And I said, well, that's Ganesh. What's Ganesh? I'll tell you later. Just enjoy. So Ma is an amazing person. And I've seen other things that she's done. And when you see stuff like that and it gets validated, then you know that there's other things going on that just pure science. Even I think Ray Peat would probably have trouble with that kind of story.
Definitely. Yeah. Thoughts on B vitamin supplementation? Because I know niacin, the niacin flush is pretty toxic, but niacinamide is beneficial. And have you experimented with like supplementing thiamine or B6?
You know, back in the day I did, and I was misled for the niacin. But I'll tell you, niacin does work as a medicine because I learned that if you take 1,000 milligrams of niacin with a backup of 750 milligrams of C, you can stop poison oak or poison ivy. And I was afraid of telling my customers, so I told one lady, take 175. I said, at least maybe you get a placebo effect out of that. She comes back, it worked. I took 1,000. So she must have read my mind. She read 1,000 and 750 got rid of it. So as a homeopathic or isopathic remedy, it can work. But otherwise, I think he's right, because even Swami Nitty Gritty told me that if you keep taking niacin, you'll waterlog your tissues, that it's only to be used for therapy. And then I found out that if you use niacin regularly, the therapeutic effect for poison oak, for rabid dogs, for a whole bunch of other things don't work anymore, because your body builds a resistance. I don't know if you've heard that Ray Peat doesn't do the carrot salad anymore because he got a bacteria that figured out how to get beyond it. So now he's on the bamboo shoots and other things. Basically, we're at war with these things. And the one that he used for 20 years, finally a bacteria evolved that figured out how to get around it. So he switched. That surprised me. I just found that out recently.
That's incredible. That is
yeah,
I got to find some bamboo shoots.
They don't even go to college, but they get very smart.
Yeah. Aspirin, have you experimented with that? Because I know it's salicylic acid, right? That's the biggest benefit there.
I am still nervous about that. And I haven't taken the last aspirin I took was 1957. So I'm going to pass on that. But however, if a person has incurable cancer, something like that, then they might consider doing it. It causes stomach bleeding. I know cases of it causing Ray's syndrome in younger people. I'm a bit suspicious about it. However, I'm not going to diss it, but at this point, I'm not ready to do aspirin. Now, strangely enough, aspirin is less toxic than willow, because they used to have a problem when they used the salicylic acid. So they added acetic acid to it, making acetylsalicylic acid, and made it non-toxic and palatable. So I'm not going to knock it, but I haven't taken an aspirin since 1957, when I decided it wasn't good for me back then in high school.
Interesting. Yeah, what kind of raised my attention was my mom watches soap operas, and she has for years. And I guess they put truth with lies in the soap operas, because it's the mainstream TV. And I guess a kid died from Ray's syndrome on the soap, and it was like a whole episode dedicated to how poisonous aspirin is. It's like that kind of made me scratch my head. Like, I want to look into this now. I know they battled Tylenol. I think that was the big thing.
Tylenol can give you Ray's syndrome too. I was in El Paso, and a lady went in with flu, and she had a seizure in the emergency room. So they kept her for a week. They couldn't figure out. They had all kinds of cardio experts, and they couldn't find out. They let her go. They told me, friends, her sister told me, can you go see her and see what you can find out? So the first thing I asked her is, can you stick out your tongue? No. Could you stick out your tongue before? Yes. I said, did anyone ask you that question at the hospital? No. I said, what kind of hospital did you go to anyway? And then I said, did you take any drugs in the emergency room? No, none at all. No drugs. Did you give you anything in the emergency room? Well, they gave me 3 Tylenols. I said, you had Tylenol poisoning. She kept having the seizures. She went back to the hospital for another week. The final diagnosis, Ray's syndrome from the Tylenol. The hospital gave it. To this day, I don't know who paid the bill on that. Did her insurance? Did the hospital would evolve? But anyway, there it is. Ray's syndrome.
I think it's called like iatrogenic diseases, like a disease you get in the hospital or something.
I think it's the number one killer, because they have the 5-year limit so that they can be clear of that. But I think a lot of cancers come 5 years later from that. I prefer the cancer treatment that the Greek guy did in that story, where he decided he was going to die. Instead of going into the hospital, I'm going to go visit my relatives for the last time. 25 years later, he wondered, why am I not dead? He went back to see his doctors, and they couldn't answer him because they were all dead. So that's for cancer.
That's amazing. I think this will be the last question. Thoughts on pacemakers? Just a random thing, because I've heard. I think Ray mentioned it. It could raise IQ if it actually upregulates the heartbeat. I thought that was fascinating. I've heard some other benefits of pacemakers, but
the heartbeat raised, and of course that's why many athletes, I have found, by doing certain aerobic exercises, get smarter. You notice they're really quick. They have wit. They may not be rocket scientists and things like that, but I found they're very witty. and very there kind of thing in the athletes that I've known. And so I think there's something to that. There's a type of street smarts and intelligence that a person can get, whatever they want to do, whether they want to learn how many kilograms are in a drug or whether they want to learn about baseball cards or something like that. So I think the heartbeat elevated. Actually, Swami Nitty-Gritty said, if you want to be sexy, breathe quickly, because then it attracts women. But he didn't advise doing it all the time because you would also shorten your life. He actually went to the amount of breaths, and you'll find animals do that. Ray Peat disses that and said there's something else involved. But I tend to go with that research that animals that breathe slowly, like a turtle, which breathes 4 breaths per minute, they live to 300 years. And the ones that breathe very quickly either die or they do a meditation technique. Like a hummingbird would normally be dead in a year, but because they hibernate during the day, just like a bat, they live long lives by recharging themselves that way. So that's one thing I'm open on, and I'm more for the breath thing.
Interesting. Yeah, the reason why I asked that question is I know I used to be a substitute teacher, and a lot of the people, especially in government jobs with paid for insurance, will get metal rods installed in their hips or their back, if they're having back problems. But I know a lot of elderly people have pacemakers. And so I used to think it was horrible and, it could stop when you get a magnetic field. But from what I understand with the metal rods, there's not a lot of good to that.
No, Vibrant gal here, I don't know if you know the story. She broke her ankle in 3 places. And looking at the x-ray, 3 orthopedic surgeons and a podiatrist said, and friends of mine that I went to looking at the x-ray said, there's no way you have to put pins in that. Well, she refused. When we went to the 3rd orthopedic surgeon, he said, why have you waited so long? I'm going to have to break it again. Then he said, well, let me try to work with you like it is and not break it. She's walking around fine. And I think the orthopedic surgeon was actually amused that she had beat the odds, because everybody else was getting pins for little things like a little broken finger or something they'd get it. She had 3 major breaks. The bone was all aligned. We read about something called Wolff's Law, that if you leave nature alone, it will kind of reset itself. It did. She's walking around fine today.
Wow, that's awesome. I just started back on my friend. My friend owns a company in Canada that sells elk antler velvet, and just the research on like stem cells and the elk, they shed them every year. It's done humanely. Are you a fan of that stuff for regeneration?
Regeneration, yes, but through our own body. Recently, a friend of mine threatened me to ask Ray Peat. If you have to ask Ray Peat this question about what is it called? I got to think of the name of it. What, pleomorphism. Pleomorphism. Is that for real? And he surprised me with his answer. He said, yes, but it has a greater extent. It's pluripotent stem cells. We have them. We don't have to get them. They're in our body to make. And if you eat correctly, you can generate and regenerate anything you want. That really surprised me, because I believe that same thing, because I've seen regeneration of that people have. My friend Judy, get this. I did a neck alignment on her, and her eyelid drooped on the left side. And she asked, what's wrong? And I do really light alignment. So I said, I don't know. She went to the doctor, and the doctor said, how are you even walking into this office? You have cancer of the spine. You have cancer of the lungs. You have breast cancer. You have cancer everywhere. Get your affairs in order. You shouldn't even be able to walk in here. So she was all depressed. I met her after. And then she decided, I'm going to fight this. She went and got a hole burned in her back by these 2 ladies that later were investigated by Michael Tierra, the herbalist. He couldn't find any cures at all. But Judy got rid of all of her cancer for 9 years. And I don't know what she finally died of 9 years later. In fact, she said, I want to live long enough to meet the love of my life. She met the love of her life. She died. He died right after. And they lived happily ever after, I suppose, in some other dimension. But she was cancer-free, went in every year. they started, well, let's look in the spleen. You got to have cancer someplace. You can't have that kind of spread cancer and be cured. Well, she was. And guess what? She never gave up chain smoking.
Oh, wow. Yeah, I remember you said in one interview that cancer could be beneficial in against some pathogens, right? Or like in certain small amounts.
It can be a cure for tuberculosis, and tuberculosis can be a cure for cancer. And I didn't understand that till I got a hold of Emmanuel Revisi. His textbook is on the internet in all 772 pages, which is a blessing because last I heard it was selling for $600 or $700 to get a copy. Fortunately, I had gotten a copy before Revisi went on his cosmification. But Revisi really understood a lot about cancer and how it works and how you get opposing things like, choline toxins. He found a person that had been in the hospital, had cancer, was in there to die, and had a few weeks to live, and he got a fatal disease. He survived the fatal disease, and the cancer went entirely away. So when Coley found out about this man, it was 8 years previous. He wanted to find out, was that man still alive, and how did this happen? He was still alive. So then he developed Coley's. First, he tried giving them diseases and killed half of them, and half survived. Then he figured out a way to do the choline toxins kind of in between and cure people. And he was doing it, except there was more money in radiation, so that came. Recently, a doctor, Dr. O, he brought choline back, and now they've brought part of the treatment back. They've turned it into a temperature treatment, like super hot, and left the other part out conveniently. But he's off the quack watch list now anyway. But that's what he did. He basically gave one disease to cure another. And I've had it happen to myself, and I've seen it happen to other people, where they get one disease and it cures another disease.
That's so cool. So I think we're going to close out the show. That was super informative, and I'll have to have you back. Thank you, Adam.
Thank you.
That concludes episode 3 of Divine Superconductor Radio. Thank you so much for joining us. I had a lot of fun talking with Atom Bergstrom. I feel like I can talk to him forever. He has so much information and such a diversity of topics that he's interested in. And I love how he kind of has the Guinness World Records kind of vibe going on. He has a lot of awesome stories about really unbelievable human feats. So I find that really fascinating, and I used to watch that show and watch people balancing on spikes and all that stuff. So I think that's definitely an aspect to health, is the power of the mind and emotions. So if you want to check out Atom Bergstrom's work, you can go over to solartiming.com. He has a lot of great ebooks, a lot of great interviews if you YouTube his name, and he is also on Facebook. Today's quote is by Dr. Raymond Peat. The fragments of deteriorating PUFA combine with proteins and other cell materials, producing aminogenic substances, the so-called, quote, advanced glycation end products that have been blamed on glucose excess are mostly derived from the peroxidation of the, quote, essential fatty acids, unquote. The name glycation indicates the addition of sugar groups to proteins, such as occurs in diabetes and old age, but when tested in a controlled experiment, lipid peroxidation of polyunsaturated fatty acids produces the protein damage about 23 times faster than the simple sugars do. If you receive value from this show, I would really appreciate if you head over to matt-blackburn.com, and I have all my recommended products there. It's taken me years to build relationships and find the most affordable and effective tools to support your health. So please check that out, and any purchase you make on there supports my continuing work and research.